girls had a horrible past they were striving to hide and forget. They'd left their home 2 days ago. They hitchhiked from their gorgeous family home in Brindleton Bay to Windenburg. They were hiking through a forest near the outskirts of the town when they came upon the water's edge, a rowboat. They paddled the boat to a nearby island that they could only just see through the snowy storm. When they reached land, they abandoned the rowboat and trekked through the island's forest for several hours, all night until the girls found an abandoned, cabin-like shed. It was the first shelter they had found since getting off the rowboat. The blizzard was only getting worse, so Jessie made the choice to enter the front gate and seek shelter. Jessie had pushed the front gate to the shelter's yard open, revealing an empty garden, scarecrow, beehive, and a table that appeared to be for some kind of handiwork. She tiptoed through the deep snow covering the path, encouraging her sister to follow. She knocked on the door and called out. No response. It was safe to go inside. Finally, after hours to days of escaping from their past, had they found shelter. They barely had any money left. They were hoping that the shelter had heating, light, running water, and food. Jessie went inside to see. Talia slipped inside the shelter just after Jessie. Jessie was surprised that they had finally made it inside, that they were safe. They had managed to find shelter somewhere where no one could be seen for miles. Well, at least they couldn't see anything through the blizzard. The shelter appeared to be a stakeout shed, maybe belonging to someone who had come up in the warmer months and camped nearby in the woods. They found a tackle kit and knives, so maybe the person who used to come here did some kind of fishing or hunting, but it appeared as though no one had been there for at least a year. The curtains and tablecloth were tattered and disintegrating. The fridge was turned off and there appeared to be no power connected. There was an outdoor bathroom that was fenced in, but the shower only ran cold water and the toilet was really old. There was a sink inside as well, but it only ran cold water. The oven operated on gas, of which there were only 3 bottles out the back, so they could cook food if they were to have any, but wouldn't be able to refrigerate anything. There were 2 camper fold-out beds and oil lamps. The girls settled in for the night and slept peacefully. The girls barely slept through the night as the storm continued to worsen and temperatures fell. Jessie coughed all night and Talia tried to help her out, but it was no use without Jessie's medication. When they woke, it was still snowing outside, but the storm had settled. They decided to check the outside of the property. There were plants that they could eat, though most of them weren't harvestable due to the snow and frost. There was a floristry table and a beehive. They gathered what they could from the garden and some honey. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get them through the snowstorm. They were going to try and go fishing, but the lake had frozen over during the night. They were hoping that once the snow eased up, they could use the tackle kit and other gear they had found in the shed to fish for food. Jessie was bonding with the bees and Talia was making an arrangement when they decided to build a snow pile. Jessie was facing away from the yard when the snow eased up enough for her to notice another structure. There was another house nearby. Maybe they could help the girls out. Maybe they had medicine for Jessie. Or maybe it was a more suitable abandoned house that they could break into where they would be more warm and comfortable. Jessie had pointed out to Talia that there was another structure in the distance that they could see now that the storm was slowing. There was also a person walking nearby that structure towards the lake. Talia ran over to the man, and Jessie went inside. She wasn't feeling well and the cold was only making things worse. Talia tried to get the man's attention, but he couldn't hear her over the wind. Once she got closer, she shouted again, telling him that they needed help and medicine, and then he noticed her. He was confused and seemed shocked to see another human on the island. He asked Talia who she was and how she got onto this private island. Talia was on the ice. She shrieked as she fell into the cold snow. When she looked up to confront the man again, she noticed he had already left. He was nowhere to be seen, so Talia returned home to get dry and comfort Jessie. Talia was picking herself up off of the ground to head home to Jessie when she heard rustling in the bushes behind her. She called out to figure what emerged. It was a little boy. He told Talia that he lived on the island, on the other side far away, and that he had got lost whilst going for a walk. Talia offered their shed for the night, or however long it took until the storm had died down, enough for him to walk home. Talia made her way back to the shed with the child in tow. They approached the door, and she asked him if he knew who owned the shed. He had no clue because he didn't ever come over to this side of the island. Jessie was apprehensive as to whether or not to trust this kid, who they had found out was named Joey, but he really had no reason to tell on the girls. Jesse was inside helping Joey change out of his wet, snowy clothes and ensuring he got warm. Talia went outside and was using the toilet in the freezing snow when she heard footsteps near the gate. She stood up and saw a shadow pass over the gap between the fence and the locked gate. Talia yelled out to the figure and heard scattering footsteps that she assumed were heading along the side of the shed. She doubted herself for a second. Maybe she was just being silly because what had happened with the man earlier that night. Surely it was just an animal and the rest was in her imagination. Talia had stepped back inside after going to the toilet. She thought she heard someone standing near the gate and then walk around the side of the shed, but she assumed that she was wrong and over-worrying and overreacting. Because of this, she decided not to mention it to Jesse or Joey because she didn't want to worry them if it was nothing. Talia and Joey were sitting on the bed and Jessie was using her burner phone to create new identities for herself and Talia. She was really tech savvy and researched that kind of thing before they ran away. She knew they would need it. She knew they would have to start school under new names to fit in so that no one suspected them. She also knew that in order for them to get jobs and earn money, they would need ID. So she worked on that for a few hours, finally had it all down pat and registered them in a local school. She also made a fake ID for a parent of the two girls, Jenny and Tara, and used the burner phone's number to connect it with the school's systems. That way, if the school wanted to contact the girls' parents, Jessie could handle it so they wouldn't get suspicious. Jessie was sitting at the table finalizing some details when she heard a noise outside. Nobody else seemed to hear it, but she peeped out the window anyway. It was hard to make out through the snowstorm, but she swore that she could see someone. Since she had been off her medication and her head was a little foggy, no one else heard the noise. She wasn't certain, so she just chalked it up to her wild imagination and went back to her phone. The phone was running out of battery, and the shed had no power, so she needed to work quickly and charge it at school on Monday. The girls were asleep in their fold-out beds when Joey slipped out the front door and into the snow. A few days after they started going to school, Talia found a job at a cafe on the mainland in town. She used her fake ID to get the job and nailed her job interview. She told the employee that she wanted a job that allowed her to work every morning before school so she'd become financially independent from her parents. Little did they know she was everything dependent from her parents. She worked from 5 a.m. until 7 a.m. every morning, rowing over the lake at 4:30 a.m. every morning to leave and come back by 7:30 a.m. to quickly get changed for school, pick up Jessie so they could go back to the mainland for school together. The money meant that they could afford to buy fresh food products daily since they couldn't refrigerate anything. Talia couldn't wait to save enough money to be able to put down a bond for an apartment. The girls aimed to live in San Myshuno, the Big Smoke, so that there would be more heavily populated area and there was less chance of anyone recognizing them. That would also mean that they could finally shower and go to the toilet indoors and sleep on real beds. What a dream. Jessie's condition worsened when they started going to school. She started developing migraines again and she hadn't experienced these symptoms before she started her medication. She knew it was because she'd been off her tablets for too long, so she got a job working in fast food in order to be able to afford her medication. A few weeks later, the girls had been going to school and blending in just fine. Their jobs were going well and they were starting to earn enough money to afford food and Jessie's medication. They would need a lot more to rent their own place, but this was just a start. Talia was working that morning at the cafe when the guy she saw during the storm came up to her at the counter. They recognized each other and chatted a little. He stuck around the cafe until her shift was over and asked her if he would like to go out for dinner that weekend. Talia said yes, knowing that he knew a lot about the girls and also that he had a nice warm house. She wasn't planning on using him completely, but maybe if they started seeing each other, well, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. It was the weekend and the day that Marco and Talia had their date in town. He invited her out to a nice place for dinner, so she saved up some of her pay to buy a pretty red dress. She was also wearing her grandmother's blue stone necklace for good luck. They met outside on the footpath, and Marco told Talia that they had some pretty bad news. The guy who owned the property Talia and Jessie were staying at had contacted Marco. Marco and Talia were running late for their reservation, so they decided to continue their conversation inside out of the snow. They were seated and had ordered when Talia brought back up the man who owns the property. Marco told Talia that it wasn't much to worry about, but that the guy would be coming back during the summertime. Basically, the guy who owns the property is a casual fisherman. He likes to come out to the island during the warmer months and camp out in the woods nearby or under the stars in his yard whilst he stays there for a while. He goes fishing during the day and then camps out and relaxes the rest of the time. He had the shed on the property to store his things in and in case it ever gets too hot in the sun or too cold at night. There were 2 fold-out beds in the shed because his wife comes with him too, and she hates sleeping in the outdoors, so she always sleeps inside. The other was there in case the weather was ever too bad for him to also sleep outside. Talia asked Marco about the power being disconnected, and Marco said it was because they only came every now and then, so he only turns on the main when they come to visit. The girls could probably find the main and turn the power on once the snow went away, but then he would get positive power bills for the property and know that it had been turned on. After their meals and drinks the conversation stopped. A friend of Marco's, Carol, was in the booth over and would not stop chatting. This annoyed Talia just a little, and she got a little sassy. They were eating their meal, making small talk, when Talia decided to continue bringing up the shed guy in their living situation. Carol and her date had left, so Marco and Talia could finally talk privately. Talia was trying hard, really hard, to impress this fellow. She had a little plan up her sleeve that she was planning on implementing, but she had to plant the seed of that today. Talia asked Marco if he lived alone, and he explained that he did. This was great news. Marco became suspicious to all Talia's questions she was probing, but she explained to him that she was just anxious about her and her sister's living situation since Marco had dropped the summer deadline news. Marco made a snide remark, and that the girls obviously knew that they couldn't live in the shed forever. This made Talia's blood boil over, but she didn't show her anger. She mustered up some tears and put on a waterworks show. Marco told her to calm down and go into the bathroom to freshen up. Talia slipped into the bathroom to freshen up. She pulled out her prepaid burner phone that she got at the gas station and messaged Jesse about how the date was going. It was all going to plan. He was falling for the act that Talia was putting on. Basically, she was trying to convince him that she really cared about him. A lot. She was just really striving to be able to live in his house with Jesse once winter was over and the shed man came back during the summer. After a few messages backwards and forwards with Jess, the phone alerted Talia that she had no signal. Talia realized how juiced she was feeling. She had only had 2 drinks. It was certainly time for her to head home. Next thing Talia knows, she's being asked to leave by the staff. She'd passed out on the floor after stumbling out of the bathrooms. Talia was embarrassed, but mostly upset that Marco had left her there alone. I mean, she didn't exactly have feelings for him, so she didn't really care, but she just thought she'd made enough progress on him tonight to the point where he would have taken her home, right? As Talia was walking home from her dinner date with Marco, Jesse had knocked off work and was having dinner. Something didn't quite taste right though, and in that moment she wished she was Talia. Ever since they were young, Talia had always been the best in any and every situation. They were twins, but Jesse was born at a disadvantage. Talia never saw it this way though. She saw the positives in Jess that nobody else ever did. Their parents would especially favor Talia all the time. This is part of the reason why they chose to run away. Despite how everybody treated Jesse as inferior, Talia always saw them as equals. She would do anything to help her sister. They were twins, but Talia acted more of her big sister, and she always took care of Jesse when she felt unwell and fended off the bullies that would try and tease her. That is why Talia was trying to charm the neighbor into letting them stay with him, because she wanted to help her sister out and was willing to do anything to achieve that, even if it meant going out for dinner with a sucky guy who left her on the floor when she passed out. Even if it meant going to work the next day with a raging headache, Talia would do anything for Jesse, but that didn't make Jesse's dinner taste any better. The girls were heading out the door for school on a Monday morning. Talia was extremely tired because she'd been working every morning for the past week and hadn't been able to recover from her date with Marco. Talia called out to Jesse because they were going to be late, but she didn't realize that she was the one slowing them down when she'd forgotten her backpack. Talia exclaimed out, "Oh no!" Jessie thought this was about her backpack, so she passed it to Talia, but that was not it. It was the beehive. It had mites, and the girls needed to buy a treatment whilst they were in town. Maybe that is why Jessie's dinner didn't quite taste right the other night. It was a Friday night and the girls were attending a party in town. Everyone there was celebrating the last official day of winter, welcoming the warmer months to come, but this scared the Irwin twins. They knew this meant that the storm would start to melt away and they had 3 months maximum to move into a different place before the guy who owns the shed they live in would be coming to visit. Despite this, they had to act normal and fit in. They tried to make the most of the night and have some fun. Talia introduced Jessie to a friend of hers from work, Sophie. They got on really well, and Jessie's mind was soon taken off from her worries and instead focused on Sophie. Sophie and Jessie got to know each other better throughout the night. They were really hitting it off. Jess really liked Sophie. Jess liked Sophie a lot. The party had come to an end and everyone was heading home. Jessie and Sophie were saying goodbye when Jessie leaned in and kissed Sophie. Talia saw this happening and knew that it was a good idea to introduce the pair. Jessie had been going through so much lately, she deserved to have a little bit of fun for one night. The girls had returned from the party and Jessie fell straight asleep. Talia sat and worried about the ever-pending summer that was fast approaching, but fell asleep as well. Her worries could wait until the morning. The girls had just arrived at the New Year's party. It was the last official day of the cold, snowy weather. It wouldn't be long before all the snow would be melted away and spring would have sprung. Summer was fast approaching, meaning the shed guy could be heading to the island for a summer vacation soon. The girls tried not to worry about this though, just for one night. Jessie was standing by the water's edge, thinking about how fortunate she was to have made it this far. To have made it out of their crummy living situation to, well, another crummy living situation, but at least now the girls were free. They could do anything they wanted. They could be anything they wanted. Now all they needed was a house to live in. That's exactly what Talia was focusing on. The party was over, Talia put her coat on, and Marco walked her home. They stopped off and talked for a bit on Marco's porch. Talia had just offered to walk herself home when Marco invited her inside. Talia was finally inside Marco's house. He was about to say something when Talia interrupted him and suggested they get a bite to eat. Whilst Marco was in the shower, Talia decided to crawl into his bed and go to sleep. She assumed he was going to follow her after he finished his shower, but boy, she was wrong. He went off at Talia when he noticed she was sleeping in his bed. He said how inappropriate it was. Talia asked him to be straight up with her because she was so confused about where they stood. He had said that he wanted to be just friends. He was older than Talia, so maybe he thought it was best not to go further than friends at this point. Talia put on her coat and walked home. Talia returned home and woke Jessie so they could start making some money. They were working against time in the snow that was melting around them. They had to make enough money to rent an apartment. Fast. The snow was melting away, the girls were a week into spring and it wouldn't be long before summer loomed. Everything was breaking and time is running out. Spring has sprung. 3 weeks later, Talia was meeting up with her boyfriend Damien on the beach. Talia and Damon had formed a genuine connection quickly. He knew everything about Talia and Jessie, but he didn't mind. He came from a rocky family situation as well. The beach Damien and Talia were meeting on just so happened to be right in front of Marco's house. Was Talia just doing this all to make him jealous? Talia truly does like Damien now. She'll admit, in the beginning she was just trying to make Marco jealous, but it has evolved into so much more. It was the next day and Talia was working on the garden. Jessie had a negative attitude towards the changing weather, not just because it meant the shed guy was coming in the summertime, but because there was so much mud everywhere. Talia decided to show Jess just how muddy things could get. A mud fight. After a while of mucking around in the yard, Jess started to have a coughing fit. The girls decided enough was enough for now and they headed inside. After coming back from the mud fight, Jessie wasn't feeling too good. She was burning up and coughing. She tried to downplay it, but Talia knew she wasn't well. They decided to rest together for a bit. Jessie was feeling well enough to go to her work shift. She had to. There was really no other option. If she wanted to be able to afford her medication, she had to work. It was a school day, but the girls skipped school to go to the pool with their friends. Everyone else was skipping school because it was the first warm day where the public pool was open. They needed to keep under the radar, but missing school in order to fit in actually worked out better for them than if they denied hanging out and went to school. Jessie still wasn't feeling the best, so she couldn't go swimming. Sophie noticed that she was hanging out on the chairs and came over to comfort her. Jessie didn't want Sophie to miss out just because she wasn't well, so they compromised by Jessie sitting on the edge of the pool with her feet in the water. An hour or so had passed and everyone was hopping out of the pool and changing into their dry clothes. Jessie and Sophie went to get ice cream with some of the other friends, but Talia decided to stay back with Damien. They went upstairs to mess around. Someone was coming by up the stairs, so they hurried into the closet. Boy, was it dark in there. The fun day had come to an end and the girls came back home and changed into their PJs. Talia was singing and dancing about the room because she knew she was so happy and carefree. Little did she know it was all about to change. 1 month later, it was well and truly springtime. Talia noticed she had officially missed her period and decided to take a pregnancy test just in case. She was sure it would show negative, but it didn't. It was positive. Talia was pregnant. Talia had told Jesse that she was pregnant, and they decided they were going to have to keep the baby, and that they wanted to keep the baby. The girls were almost old enough to stop attending school, so all they had to do now was keep the pregnancy on the down low until school was out. Until then, they needed to find a stable place to raise the child in. Talia was meeting Micro today and hoping he would have some solutions for her. Talia checked herself in the mirror one more time before heading out to meet Marco on the beach. Talia was waiting in the heat for a while and she was starting to feel unwell. This first trimester was really impacting Talia. Marco arrived and rushed up to her and hugged her. Talia knew something was up because he seemed really rushed and worried. Marco said Talia needed to listen up right now. He had something really important to tell her. Meanwhile, whilst Talia and Marco were talking on the beach, Jessie was inside the shed and she heard the doorknob rattling and a key turning around the lock. She held her breath and she hid beneath her bed so she couldn't be seen. As the lock continued to rattle, a male's voice could be heard from the other side. He was getting annoyed at the lock, mumbling under his breath. He then yelled and kicked the door before telling Jessie to come out and talk. Somehow Jessie knew that he didn't want to just talk. The guy who owned the property had cameras installed nearby and had spotted Jessie in a clip. He saw that there was a girl with red hair squatting in his shed and asked Marco to go check it out. Marco said that he did and he saw the girl there. Basically, he dobbed in Jess and now he was trying to rescue Talia. Marco had just admitted to Talia that he does have feelings for her. She didn't understand why he was saying this now and why it was relevant to the shed guy and Jessie. Marco explained that the owner of the shed was heading over there right now. Marco had organized to meet Talia on the beach at this time of day to lure her away from the shed so the shed guy didn't notice there was a second girl living there too. Marco proposed that they run away together. Talia refused and told Marco that she was pregnant. He still wanted her to come with him. Marco continued to try and get Talia to go with him. He said that he could save her and her baby, but he was the only one who got the girls in the mess in the first place. Talia refused to go with him. She knew that she had to help her sister, no matter the risk. Talia began calling Jess and ran towards the shed. She was hoping she could make it to Jess before he did. The shed guy was heading through the back door as Talia alerted Jess to get out. Just as the back door opened, Jess slipped out the front door. Talia told Jess to run as she stepped inside the shed to take the blame. She tried to tell the guy, who said his name was Frederick, that she was homeless and pregnant to try and get him to let her go, but he did not care. Frederick told Talia that he is a cop. She instantly knew there was no way talking her way out of this one. He told Talia that she was to come with him and assured that this meant they were going to take her to the police station. Talia was sure their fake IDs and name wouldn't pass the test of the police station. Surely by now her parents had reported the girls missing. Talia knew she had to get away and had to protest, otherwise she would wind up back at home. She said that she wasn't going to go with him. Frederick shoved her and told her to go on and try. Talia apologized and started to turn around. She had made it away from him pretty easily. That was easy. A little too easy. As Talia walked out the door, Marco jumped out and scared her. What was he doing here? Is he working with this guy? Was he in on this the whole time? As Talia was fighting to get away from the man, Jessie was hiding behind a rock nearby. She knew this was bad, really bad. She knew it was no use to go back and try and help Talia. She was best trying to run away and get help, and trying to help Talia in another way. She ditched her blue coat for now and ran into the woods. She had Damien's number, so she decided she was going to text him to see if he could come help her once they got to a safe area. Talia saw that Jessie was still nearby. She bolted for the gate as she saw Jessie running away. Hopefully she is going to be able to get away from them and get help for me. Marco chased after her, questioning where she thought she was going. He told her to get on the ground. He went to push her to the ground, but she already argued that she was already getting down. She lowered herself onto the grass as Marco yelled at her. She told him not to hurt her. She was pregnant after all, but Marco stated that he simply did not care. Fred came out of the shed. He had been scoping the property for anyone else and asked Marco if he had Talia under control. Once they had established that there was only one girl, Fred paid Marco a lot of cash. It was clear to Talia that he had been working with this man the whole time. They must be doing some shady business. She wondered if Marco really did want to protect her in the beginning. Why was he sparing Jessie now? He could just say to Fred that there was another girl that he saw run off. But why didn't he? Maybe he still did care for Talia genuinely? After receiving his pay, Marco went back inside his home. Talia didn't have time to ask any of her questions. She just remained on the ground and waited for her next orders. Frederick and Talia had arrived at his home in Willow Creek. He led Talia towards the back of his house and they approached a barbed wire fence. Frederick opened the gate and Talia saw a set of stairs going down into the basement. She told him she wasn't going down there, but he said that he'd be fine with pushing her down there if he had to. Talia decided to cut her losses and walk herself into the corrupt cop's secret prison cell. Once down the stairs that led into the basement, Talia realized this was a small jail cell. Frederick demanded that Talia was locked inside the cell for holding. Talia knew this was wrong, but she got in and agreed with his demands. She was so hungry, she just wanted some food to eat. Whilst in the cell, Talia spotted a missing persons poster. It looked just like her. Frederick returned with Talia's dinner. It tasted horrible, but she was glad she received anything at all. It was Talia's first time sleeping in the cell. Despite the fact that it was a horrible prison-like room, it was much warmer and more comfortable than where she'd been sleeping previously. She fell asleep, hoping Jess was going to save her soon. A few hours later, Jessie was certain the coast was clear, so she returned to the shed. Once she approached the gate, she noticed it and the doors were all boarded up. She'd planned to go inside and get some of their belongings and her medication, but it was impossible and time for plan B. Jessie headed inland more after discovering that the shed was locked up. It was late at night by the time she found an abandoned campsite. She decided to get some rest and start trying to get Talia back in the morning. When Jessie woke up the next morning, she changed into some random clothes she found in the tent. Before she fell asleep, she'd messaged Damien to try and meet up tomorrow. Her phone went flat before he could reply. Jessie went to the meeting spot to develop a plan with Damien. Whilst talking, Jessie mentioned that Talia was pregnant. Talia hadn't told Damien she was pregnant yet. He was shocked. Damien was really struggling to process the fact that Talia was pregnant. Jessie was worried that this would be a roadblock in them trying to save Talia, but Damien had already begun planning to get her back. Jessie returned back to the campsite after organising plans with Damien. They were set to complete their plan the next day at nightfall. Jessie hoped it wouldn't be long before they had their own place in San Myshuno. Jessie was at the campsite, getting ready for the next day. She was hungry, so she used the fishing rod from the campsite to catch some food. She made a fire and cooked the fish so that she could have a warm dinner. It was wild how much her survival skills had improved since running away. The next morning, it was so hot. Summer had certainly came early. The girls needed to find a real place to live soon. The night had finally come. Damien and Jessie were going to meet up with the crook crop, Frederick, to get Talia back. Frederick tried to lie and say he didn't know who they were talking about, but Jessie admitted that she was living in the shed as well and saw Talia be taken. Jessie called him out for being a corrupt cop and threatened him. He said he was willing to give them a chance for a trade-off. Jessie set up a deal with Frederick. He and Damien would fight it out, and whoever won got to keep Talia. Whilst Damien had Frederick distracted, Jessie ran off to the cop's house in Willow Creek to save Talia. Damien won, but the cop caught on that Jessie was leaving. After he ran after her, hoping he could get to Talia before Jessie did. Meanwhile, Talia was trying to get out of her cell. She noticed the keys were nearby, just out of reach. If someone was on the other side, or the keys weren't blocked by glass, they could easily be grabbed, and Talia could get out of the cell. Where was Jessie? Jessie had made it to the address in Willow Creek. She hid behind the fence as she saw Frederick approach the gate. She was going to wait until he opened it so she could sneak in behind him. Talia had broken herself out of the cell. Frederick caught her and tried to get her back into the cell, but Jessie came running down the stairs. It was 2-on-1 now. The girls could smell freedom. The girls made a decision. They had to lock Frederick up. They had to lock him up and run. They were so close to freedom and a new start. With Frederick locked in the cell, the girls began to head to Damien's apartment. Talia let Jessie go up the stairs first as she stood there for a minute to see Frederick in the cell. She hoped she would never have to see him ever again. As she opened the gate to the outside world, she realized it was raining. In that moment, she had never felt more free. Talia and Jessie made it back to Damien's apartment. Damien was okay, but he had so many questions about Talia and Jessie's living situation and the pregnancy. Talia was going to sit down and explain all these things that she had to clear up, but she had to call the school first. Talia and Damon chatted and discussed their life stories. They couldn't believe they were going to have a baby. Over the next few weeks, the girls kept buckling down for school. It wouldn't be long before they were done with school and could get full-time jobs. Damien was so supportive. He learned all about the girl's story and history. He loved to cook for them, even if all they could afford was mac and cheese. Jessie was really struggling. School, work, family, friends, relationships, everything was changing. Despite this, she was still so glad that they had a roof over their heads. She just needed time to adjust to the new lives they were now set to live. Everyone started to settle into their lives. The girls were out of school now and all three were working full-time. Talia and Damien were so in love. Jessie felt like a major third wheel sometimes. She really wanted to reach out and reconnect with Sophie, but she wasn't sure if she was still interested. A few months had passed and Talia hadn't seen a doctor her entire pregnancy because she was trying to keep it a secret. But she didn't need a doctor to know that she was going into labor. Damien and Jessie were freaking out, but Talia had done enough research to know that this home birth was going to be okay. She was a little early though. But the baby came out healthy and well. All was going smoothly when Talia realized it wasn't over. There was another baby. The twins were doing well. Damien and Talia made great parents. All they could dream of was to have their own home one day. Until then, Talia started a little garden on the balcony. Jessie loved taking care of the twins. She knew that she wanted a family of her own someday, so she decided to invite Sophie to her birthday party. Okay, you guys, that is it for the Irwin twins story. In the future, Damien and Talia are planning on getting married in the coming years and moving into their own home. Jessie and Sophie have reconnected their spark and they want to meet up again for coffee someday, so hopefully they'll get together as well, but that is where we will be leaving Talia and Jessie's story for now. Thank you for coming along the ride with us, and if you would like to see the Irwin twins story for a second season, let me know. If you have any ideas of what we could do in season 2, comment them down below as well, but until next time, hope you all have a very snazzy day and I'll see you all soon. Bye guys!